One second. I hit live, but I forgot to make sure my new mic is here as well. Okay, excellent. Hi, everyone. This is Prasha Dutra, and welcome to another episode of the Prasha Dutra Show. And today I have a very special guest with me. I met Katy through the interwebs of LinkedIn and through some incredibly kind people who introduced us. But one of the things I loved about Katy's journey is that, she's the role model I didn't know I needed because she's a mom of three, she's an entrepreneur, and she was at the top of the STEM career ladder. She actually used to work in biotech. So it's really exciting to get to chat with her today because I want to ask her how you can get VP level ready. And what can you do today to change the course of your career, and how some small actions can define your future. And finally, the most important thing that Katy does is how you can have a seat at the table, because that's really important and that's missing in most of these male dominated professions. You belong in those executive rooms, and Katy is going to help us figure out how you can do that. So let's welcome Katy McAfee today to chat more about this topic, how to become a vice president. Hi, Katy, how are you?
I'm great, Prasha. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, this is so exciting. Oh, tell us, like, I'm always curious. How did you become a VP? Let's start there.
Yeah, you know what? It was one of those things. I actually knew I wanted to be a VP for most of my career, right? Like my first job I went in, I looked at the VP that I worked for and I was like, yep, I want to be like you when I grow up. And of course, it was like a 6'3" alpha male. Like it was someone who's not like me at all. Um, but I was from very early in my career, this was something that I was working towards.
Hmm.
I did run into a lot of challenges. Like it was not, some people, it's like they're almost like on a rocket ship to the top. That was not me, right?
Mm.
It was like up, down, plateau, bumps all along the way. Um, because what I noticed was that I would say hard work,
Mm.
being really curious, putting your hand up, all of that stuff will get you to a certain point, but it won't get you there. Right. And I kind of learned this the hard way because I was that person. I was like super hardworking. I knew my stuff. I was always like, I'm going to know my stuff 10 times better than anyone else. I might be coming in, biotech, 25-year-old. I was worried people weren't going to take me seriously. I'm like, I'm going to know my stuff. But what I noticed is that once I got to the director level, and it was even getting that director role was pretty tough for me. And that's where I hit my plateau. And so I had to rethink really how I was positioning myself. And I started to become a lot more intentional about the relationships I was creating and the way I was packaging myself up and the way I was communicating. And mastering those things is really what finally got me to that next level.
Yeah.
And that's something that like I feel like we're just not taught. And this is why I struggled for so long. And that's why I want to teach as many people those same things now so that they can get to that next level.
I love it. I love what you said in the beginning, which is like you always knew you wanted to be a VP, whether it was because of a role model or because of, just the influence around you. But I think whenever I speak to women, the biggest challenge they have is clarity. Like they don't know what they want. And if they want it, they're not 100% sure because they're either wanting it because it's a fancy title or if it's fancy money.
Yeah.
How would you guide some of these people, especially women, when they're like, I'm not even sure what I want to do with my life, but I want to compete and I want to get ahead and things like that. So, like, what's
Mm,
your take on it? Because it was the same thing with me. I knew the title I wanted, and then I kind of built a path to it. And
yeah.
so, when I figured out that when I started talking to women, and I'm like, oh, you don't know what you want? Like, that's interesting. So, how would you like speak to those women like who are like struggling to figure out what they really want and how they can figure out like if VP is what they really want?
Yeah. I mean, I love getting to the root of what might be holding them back or what's at the root of that hesitation, right? And a lot of the women I speak with, they actually want that title, but they're afraid that they can't have a big career and also be a mom. And they can't have a big career and also have any semblance of work-life balance. So that's something that I'm always actively working to dispel because I am a
Yeah.
believer that you have a big career and a big life. You don't have to pick. But so many people, maybe they look at the executives they work with, they're like, that person, I do not want their life. They work all the time.
Mm, yeah.
Um, and so getting, I think, to the root of like, what is it, not just what title you want, what is the life you want? What do you want your life to look like? What are the
Mm,
things you really care about? What are your priorities? And what fears might be getting in the way? And once you can get clarity there, it becomes a lot easier to know what to solve for.
yes. Yes. Because if you just go after the title or the money, or even run away from that, right? Like even if you run away from that life, what are you missing? Like what, your life could have been so much better if you just chose the path knowing the type of life you want. And I love that you said that, because I think a lot of women don't think that they can design the life that they want. I feel like so many of them are stuck in this dialogue that either media promoted, or just this negative stereotype of working women or successful women. um, I feel like they're just stuck in that narrative, and they find it really hard to break from it. Do you agree with that? Like, have you seen that happen?
Well, let's look at like the media that we consume,
Yeah.
right? Where do you see successful women on like Devil Wears Prada? Do you want that life? No, right? Like suits, right? Like whatever, often when you see women in big jobs,
Yeah.
the narrative is also she's not a mom, she has no life, she's a workaholic, like all of this stuff, right? And
Mhm.
and I actually have a big issue with that
Yeah.
because a lot of the women I mean, I'm fortunate. I also get to speak to some really cool women because I contribute for Forbes.com.
Mm.
And a lot of these women, they're like C-suite, super impressive, really inspiring, and they have a family. They, volunteer for charitable organizations. They travel. They do the things they want to do because they've made that choice
Mm.
to create that life. And so to bring it back to your point about women not believing they can design the life they want, I totally agree with you. And I would say in order to design the life you want, you need to like get in the driver's seat. Like if you're going through life passively, it's not going to happen for you. You need to
Yeah.
decide to go ahead and be the one to create that. And I think that's really what sets the people apart who are able to create those lives from people who maybe, they get swept up, they don't have boundaries, and then that narrative can actually be true.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, you have to be intentional. I think that's really important. You can't just, and
Mm.
you also have to, like you said, take the control back, build systems, build those, boundaries, build those uh, parts of your life in a way that works for you, but not just for everyone. I say this all the time. Like, you can have it all if you can define all, right?
Yeah.
And your all could look different than my all, and somebody else's all could look very different. For example, one thing I have sacrificed having to build a business and baby and all of that is friendships, right? Like, there's not a lot of time to party or hang out, and I'm like, okay, let's deprioritize it, because probably doesn't it's not part of my all right now. Maybe in a few years it'll come back. But I think those hard choices can only be made once you're intentional, but then the all could look very different. It's not like everybody's going to have everything. We just have to design it based on our value system and what we really want, rather than just chasing the Instagram perfect life that everyone else has. So I love that. So tell me, like, the early days of your career. I know you started in biotech. Like, how did
Mm.
you sort of navigate some of the early days? You were also in the sales organization, which is also very male dominated.
Yeah.
Do you remember any early memories of where it was just like one of the hard memories where you had to overcome either bias or something very common that happens to people all the time, but you tackled it differently?
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I started the first 15 years of my career was biotech. So I was in
Yeah.
biotech for a while. And I always joke that like I like stumbled into my career because I did a degree in biopharmaceutical science. People that were in my program used it like a pre-med program because
Mm.
you graduate with all the courses you needed to go into med school. And so I'm like 70% of my class was trying to get into med school. And then the people that didn't get into med school were going to do grad work. And I was like one of the only people like, I don't want to do this. And I sort of happened to find out about this company that was hiring salespeople. I knew I really wanted to work with people. Um, I knew I kind of liked sales just from some like crappy, you know, university jobs I had had. And so I decided to give it a shot. And I actually loved it. I loved it. Like I could not believe that they were paying me to do what I was doing. I was like traveling around the world. I was talking about a cutting edge technology that I thought could really help people's research. I think where bias came in for me was I was pretty immediately and acutely aware that people didn't automatically take me seriously.
Mm.
You know, I was a young girl, right? I mean, I think I was 25 because it took me a while to get through university because I did not know what I wanted to do. So I've ended up in 3 different programs, but that's a whole other story. Um, but I still looked really young, right? I
Mm.
looked young, and what I noticed was that people underestimated me. People didn't take me seriously. This actually continued for a fair bit of my career. Okay. I remember being in
Yeah.
a VP and going to a customer meeting with one of my reps that worked for me. And the person we were talking to just like assumed that he was the boss. And
Mm.
then when they found out that I was actually the VP, they started laughing. They were like, "Oh my gosh, she's your boss." And I was like, "It's not that funny." You know? Um, yeah, so I faced it a lot. I mean, to me, my personality is this might sound surprising because like my whole career and my life is dedicated right now to empowering women and trying to fix the systems and create equality and all of this stuff. But for a lot of my career, my sort of, I guess, strategy was I'm just going to be better than everyone else.
Mm.
I was like, I'm just going to know more. I'm going to know my stuff cold. So yeah, when I walk into that room, they might underestimate me, but you better believe as soon as I open my mouth, they're going to know that like I'm the girl who knows her stuff. So that was kind of the way I thought about it, and I think that really served me actually for a lot of my career, right? I was also pretty naive. So although I felt that bias, I still didn't really realize the true bias that exists with respect to women and their career paths and the promotion gap and all of this stuff, right? Like I just didn't realize that that was a
Mm.
thing still.
Yeah.
Um, and the sales, because the sales team I was on had a lot of women on it. And I was promoted relatively quickly to middle management, anyways, right? To like a lead or
Mm.
whatever. So in those early days, I saw some things that caused me to be like, this doesn't feel right. Another example would be there was a guy on the team when I got promoted and people were going to start reporting to me instead of right to our VP because we were a startup company. There was one guy on the team that my boss was like, well, we're not going to get him to report to you though. He'll just keep reporting to me because he's not going to like it if he has to report to you because like you're a woman and like, you know, and I just remember being so confused. I was like, that's why you're making that decision? Like, again, I still didn't really recognize it as bias. I was just like, that feels like a bad decision.
Yeah.
Um, and it was only like, I'd say few years later that I really kind of woke up to
Mm.
what exists in the world today.
Yeah, yeah, same with me. I think the naivety served me really well because I was just driven by results and I love talking to people. And yeah, there were offhand comments, but I'd never like fixated on it because I didn't have the language for it or didn't understand what was going on. Even imposter syndrome wasn't a thing like 5 years ago. So
Yeah.
so I think those were a little bit better times. And ignorance was bliss, right? Like I didn't know what was happening, but now it's definitely there's more awareness, and we can help fix that as well. So yeah, that is very typical. I think as you move on to leadership roles, the biggest issue ends up being you not being taken seriously, even though you faced that when you were younger. But even as you climb the ladder, you probably have to continue to face that bias of like she doesn't know probably, or how would people feel about this or that. But I think like you said, like being obsessed with results, I think that's very key. And I think a couple of things happened with women, and you can shed more light on this, is like one, they don't understand the value of the results, right? Like, and then two, they don't know how to quantify it a lot of times because they're looking at their managers to just guide them. I was just reviewing someone's performance review and I was like, where are the results? Like and like it says increase adoption rate or something, and I'm like, how much did you increase it by? And she's like, I don't know. And I'm like, like God bless you. Like, she's like, my manager didn't tell me, So I think they don't know how to define it, but they also don't know how to drive it with their own intellect and being like, no, we're going to measure this, and this is how we're going to measure it, and this is how I'm going to contribute. So, what would be your advice to some women as they're doing their performance reviews and figuring out these, what does the result really look like, and what result would actually add to that promotion package, right? Like, you cannot have just these results that just make you look like you've worked really, really hard, like you said. Um,
Totally.
but there's no percentage, no dollar, no time saved, and you're wondering why you're not getting promoted. Like, it's really bizarre.
I was kind of lucky because I came up in sales and it was always really obvious how you were doing. Like, I didn't
Yes.
have to wonder, how am I performing compared to my colleagues? I'm like, it's right here. Everyone can see it.
Yeah.
And however, when I moved into leadership, a little bit different, right? I could look at how my team was performing, but I was so used to fixating on sales metrics that I never
Mm.
thought about how to think about anything else. And of course, there's a
Yeah.
lot of elements, a lot of different types of ROI that you can consider outside of revenue metrics. I think part of what comes into play for a lot of women, certainly a lot of women that I know and who have even worked for me, is almost like a limiting belief around, if you're good with people, you're probably not good with numbers. I don't know if you
Mm.
see. I held this for a while. I was like, I'm like good with people. That's my thing. I also felt like I was good with numbers because I was a science kid, right? So I was like, I understand that stuff.
Yeah.
Um, but I understood it. I didn't understand it with respect to like how it applied to business. I didn't have a business background. And there was one company I worked at where two really good things happened to me that didn't feel good at the time. So the first was I started working with this team who was like high performing, super intelligent,
Hmm.
really savvy. And I was like, I'm not cut out for that. Like, I don't know if I belong here. This is imposter syndrome, which I didn't know what it was called yet, but that was what I was feeling, right? I was like, I don't think I belong in the room with these people. They're talking about lots of stuff and I don't know what the heck they're talking about. And what I decided to do in any of these cases, and for anyone that is feeling any of these feelings, the best possible thing you can do is take action. Take some sort of action. So what I did is I was like, I'm just going to read. I didn't have money to go get an MBA or, I was working at a startup. They weren't going to pay for it. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to just read as many business books as I possibly can. And I just started plowing through business books. At that time in my life, I did not have a lot of money. So I'd even like go online and find the free PDF versions where like the table of contents like wouldn't even match the page numbers because an illegal, probably illegal PDF.
Yeah.
Um, and I just started reading those, and that taught me a ton in terms of business. And anyone who's going from an individual contributor to a middle manager and who wants to really be in leadership, you need to understand business. I don't care what your function is. So, and that information is out there. There's so many great books out there, and you can buy them for $20 and
Yeah.
consume that, world-class content. The second thing that happened in this job was that I had a leader who was ruthless about
Mm.
quantifying results or ROI or whatever. And so I would bring something to this person and they would be like, "You didn't quantify it, so I'm not even gonna like look at it." Like, he was like unkind about it, right?
Yeah.
And at the time I was like, it was so painful for me, but you know
Mm.
what it taught me? How to quantify stuff. It was painful and long and maybe not the way I wanted to learn it, but it changed me forever. And
Mm.
anyone can make this change. So I remember a woman worked for me and she was like, "I don't like numbers." And I was like, you have to learn to like numbers. I tell people in my group program this all the time. I'm like, if you're telling me you don't like numbers, my advice is to you, learn to like numbers, learn to love the
Mm.
data. Because if you're going to be in leadership, you need to understand how to analyze and present data in a way that is valuable. And it's a very learnable skill. And that doesn't mean you need to be able to go write algorithms or create report dashboards or doing it. You don't need to do that stuff. Ideally, someone's doing that for you, but you
Yeah.
need to be able to understand what's the data that matters, what are the trends that matter, what are the company strategic initiatives and KPIs, and that this stuff ladders up to. Like, you need to understand that stuff. And once you can do that, then you can make that transition pretty easily.
Yeah, and that's so important. We were talking about this in our program too with my coaches, and I'm like, we need to have a session where we just tell people how their companies work. Like, they need to understand how this business runs, because everyone, especially very intelligent women, I tend to work with techies and, these scientists and researchers and people who have these big degrees, and they fixate on the details on a daily basis. They get obsessed with it, and their managers, the advice they're getting is, think about the big picture, and that's it. And then the managers walk away, like they're not giving them any more to like hold on to, right? And so I feel like that's such a great point you bring up, is that some of us are inclined and we learn about business because we like it. Like, that's how I learned it. I was just so interested in like how this company works. Like, that's all I cared about. What do we make? Why do we make it? I remember our floor, like we had operators, and they would not care about quality. And so I was like, but why would they? They don't know where this cable goes, right? So if it's just black cable, they're just making millions of feet of black cable. Nobody cares. So I started to ring up like all my sales representatives. I'm like, where does this cable go? And they're like, we don't know because we sell it to distribution. I'm like, okay, can I get the phone number for the distributor? Let's talk to them. And so I spoke to the distributor, and he's like, yeah, actually, your cable makes lays, and your cable is used in like roller coasters, and your cable is used in like, Christmas trees and that. I'm like, what? And I literally like started doing these, informational things to the floor, telling them, guys, this is what lights up your trees. This is what carries your children to school. Like, that's why you should care. And it was only because I was interested in it. It wasn't something somebody was forcing me to do. And I feel like some of us are disconnected from that. We're just so bogged down by the daily task, and we are trying to be the good girl. We're trying to be like check all the boxes girl, and not lifting our head up from our desk and like looking at this big picture of like why business works the way it does, and don't have that curiosity to like learn, like you said, like just go online, just figure that out, because there's too much value being put on technical skills, just
Oh,
too
yeah.
much.
Well, you bring up curiosity, which I think is a really key one. I think curiosity is one of the best traits you can possibly have
Mm,
to be moving up in your career, because these women can ask. They can say, "What are the things that really matter
mm,
about what I'm doing? What does the company really care? What are our bigger goals? What are," and
yeah,
asking those really curious questions that's gonna help you to think bigger
yeah,
picture. I totally I empathize with your client who heard this, because I used to hear similar stuff. "You need to think about the big picture. I need you to be more strategic." End of conversation. I'm like, "I don't know what that means." Like, I
yeah,
don't, and I think where men and women differ, a lot of men have sponsors earlier in their career that kinda take them by the hand and show them the ropes and teach them, like, what to do at every stage and why things matter, and if you don't have that person, you're left to figure it out on your own. It's really tough,
yeah.
right? I remember, so actually funny story that I haven't thought about in a long time, talking about not knowing how business works. In my first job, I
Mm,
came from science. My parents were not business people. My mom worked like part-time jobs, here and there. My dad worked for the government. Um, and so I didn't really understand business growing up. I remember even thinking like, how do people even know to go work for these like businesses? Like, this seems so abstract to me. My brain just like didn't understand it. And I remember sitting in my VP's office talking to him and asking about like how companies work. I was like, what is the deal? What is the structure? And he was saying, okay, so like I'm going to share like the company structure of like for this company. So he's like, so we have like, there's me, so I'm like the VP, and then there's you guys, right? And then above me, that's Ian, he's the CEO. And I was like, wait a second. And I was like, wait, the CEO, like the big boss. He's like, yeah, he's the big boss. I'm like, I thought he was the IT guy. And it's because we were at a startup. So and the CEO was just like very
Hands on, yeah.
technical and knowledgeable. So if
Mhm.
something went wrong with something techie, like often it was our CEO that was helping us figure it out. So I would totally go to his office and I'd be like, Ian, like my phone's not working. Not realizing this was like the big boss.
Yeah.
And I was so mortified, but that was so eye-opening. It was very early in my career.
Mm,
I maybe been there for, I don't know, 6 months. And so we were still a very small company, but that was so eye-opening for me because I realized I was like, I don't even really understand how these organizations work. And that's something I need to understand. So that was
Mm,
like my first like opening of that door to
mm.
say like, how does all of this work so that I can navigate it?
Yeah, definitely. I think curiosity is very important. And then, like you said, men have sponsors, and either because, the managers are like, oh, you're like my son. Like, I remember one of my
Totally.
managers fighting for a guy because, and then it was weird. There were two different in conversations. In one conversation, he's like, oh, this guy looks like my son, like, like a weird conversation, like, which was not related. And then when we're doing the performance reviews, he's like, of course he's gonna get a 4 out of 5. And I'm like, okay, I'm connecting the dots here. you know
And
and
yeah,
yeah, so I think it's very important for women to build the sponsor network, which was anyways going to be my next question. So this was a great segue into it. And so internal, like, I feel like even though we don't have natural sponsors, we can work on building that. We can work on getting on 15-minute chats with people. And instead of just talking about the weather or talking about the project you're working on, you could actually ask about, like, how does my project impact your department? Or how does this, like I said, when I was calling the salespeople, I'm like, how does this work as a quality person impact your sales work? And I would actually go on trips with them. Like, I would actually take my laptop and I'm like, I'm in the cars with the sales guys going to customers, meeting every single one of them across Northeast. It was crazy. The I had like an idea of what they do, and then also all the customers saw me and they're like, oh my god, we've never seen anyone from the plant, like, this never happens. But it was my initiative. It was nothing somebody was pushing me to do, or like anybody, like my sponsor telling me you have to go do it. But then I built a bunch of sponsors along the way, so in each department people knew me. And I'm telling you, that's how I grew, because people knew that, oh, Prasha is these Prasha's interested in all of this stuff, like she asks questions. So I feel like women don't realize that they can actually build that network internally. And they're always running after mentors. And I just made a reel also on this. I'm like, ditch the mentors, right? Like, get coaches, get career coaches to build your stuff. But at work, focus more on like these sponsors who can
totally.
advocate for you in the rooms that you're not there. Like my manager was doing with this guy who looked like his son, like he's sponsoring him like in all these reviews. And oh, let's promote him, let's give him this job. And I'm like, who's doing that for me in the room when I'm not there?
Yeah,
you know so yeah, what would be your suggestion on like how people can start building their sponsor network? Like I said, a few things that I said, but like to build up on it,
yeah,
like in your experience also at that level, because I'm talking more from mid manager level, because that's how far I got. But at director, VP level, like, how do you sort of start growing that network?
for sure. So you said a few things that I think are important. So first, if I take a big step back, why do men have more sponsors than women? And
Mm,
exactly to your point, it's because oftentimes when sponsorship happens organically, it's because the sponsor sees themselves in this younger person. And
mm,
because men are disproportionately represented at senior leadership, they are more likely going to see themselves in young men, right? An old white guy is going to see himself in a young white guy, right? This makes sense. Um, and so, to your point, women are less likely to organically have sponsors kind of come into their life.
mm.
I think for anybody who's listening who's not familiar, like, what are you talking about sponsors versus mentors, whatever, because I always like to stay away from vague language.
Yeah.
A mentor is somebody who gives you advice. A sponsor is somebody who will vouch for you, who will open doors for you, who will create opportunities for you. They can be within your company, they can also be outside of your company.
Mm,
But the big difference is that a mentor gives you advice, and that's pretty much it, right? And to your point, you can get lots of people can be mentors to you. You can have somebody have a one-time conversation, they could give you some mentorship. You can hire coaches that are going to mentor you. There's lots of ways that you can gain mentorship. But the people I know with extraordinary careers are the people who were also able to have sponsors
yes.
guide that career path. And when I think about me landing my very first VP job, it was through a sponsor.
Mm,
So I actually had a really great conversation with Deb Liu, who's the CEO of Ancestry. If you don't
mm,
know her, she's a former exec from Meta and PayPal, and super impressive. And we talked all about this. And she does talk about like how can you can develop mentors into sponsors.
mm,
And to your point, like, so it starts with setting up those chats, right? So it starts with just getting these people on your radar and maybe asking them for some advice. They're
mm,
not a sponsor yet. They're not even close to a sponsor yet. Um, But the first thing you can do to really start to develop that relationship is simply close the loop. And I don't know if I've mentored lots of people, and it's crazy how many people don't do this. I get on especially when I was an executive, a lot of people would reach out maybe from my past or from my teams or whatever, and they would like, oh, can you, mentor me or whatever? And they'd be asking me for all kinds of advice, and I would be giving it, oh, yeah, you could do this or whatever. And I'm giving them advice, and then they would go away. Like I would never know, did they take my advice? Did they not? Did it work?
Mhm.
So one of the best things you can do as a mentee is simply close the loop. And people always ask, like, how can I be a good mentee? How can I provide value? Just doing that is already adding value, because you know what? It's satisfying as a mentor to know what happens, to know the person cares enough
Yes.
to take your advice. So that's my first piece of advice, is just close the loop. Say, hey, thanks so much for that call last week. I took your advice. I did this. This was the outcome. And then you can be like, what do you think? What should I do next? Any other thoughts? Or you could say, are you open to getting on another call next month, or whatever the thing is, right? But close the loop, let them know what happened, and move it forward. And this is the beginning of creating that relationship. And then as you're building that relationship over time, you start to build trust, right? You start to build more of a close-knit relationship. And then you can make an ask, which is more of like a sponsor ask. Like once you have that trusted relationship, you can say, hey, anything I'm not thinking of, any opportunities you know of that that might not even be on my radar.
Yeah.
And at this point, this person's now invested in you. They're much more likely to actually really think about, like, oh, wait, you know what? There's a board, or you know what? There's a position that could really make sense for you. And I've been on both sides of this equation. So when I ended up landing my VP role, I had been in a director role. I was frustrated because felt like I was banging my head against the wall for 5 straight years. And I had, it was actually my old VP that I had worked with. We kept in touch over the years. And everyone, who these people are in your life that you're like, this is probably just a good person for me to keep in touch with, right? Maybe
Yeah.
they were like a great boss to you, or a mentor in the past, or a colleague or whatever, but you're like, they're probably going somewhere. They're probably a good person for me to just like be in touch with. Stay invested in that relationship even before you're asking for something. So this person I kept in touch with for 15 years, right?
Yeah.
But like, I guess we worked together for 3 years. And so then the next dozen years, I was like in touch with this person here and there. And I'd go have lunch with them. Like they were like an executive at Shopify. I'd go over and like we'd have lunch. We'd just catch up or whatever. And I had no ask. I wasn't trying to go work for them. I actually didn't want to leave biotech at that time.
Mm.
So, I wasn't asking for anything. I was just maintaining the relationship. And one day, after a whole series of events, I realized it was time for me to move on from the role I was in. And I happened to be going to meet this person for lunch. And so when we were sitting and chatting and talking about life, and I said, you know what? I've been thinking so much about this. I think the time has come. I think I'm going to start putting out some feelers. It's just not going to happen for me here. And it's
Mm.
really important for me that I move on to a VP role. So I'm going to sort of start to see what's out there. And this person had no idea that I was even open to looking, right? Because I had a lot of equity in the company I was at, and I was really not planning to for a long time. I was at the company for 8.5 years. I was planning to stay there like forever. And he was like, really? Like, you actually want to leave? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, I know the perfect role for you. He's like, I'm an advisor for this company. They are looking for you. He's like, look at this application. He's like, it is your experience. Why don't I put you in touch with the CEO? Why don't I set up a meeting for you guys? So I ended up going into a meeting with the CEO, like automatic interview, with a great reference. Someone saying like, this is the girl for you. And someone who's trusted, right? This is a high level guy.
Yes.
Um, I ended up getting the role, long story short. And afterwards, the CEO said to me, he's like, we were in conversation. I forget how it came up. But he was like, yeah, he's like, well, I never even really looked at your resume. And I was like, that is the power of a sponsor, right?
Yes.
Because my sponsor had so much credibility that he passed on some of his credibility to me.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, that's so great. That's such a great story. And I know so many of these stories that, at those levels, people are not hired from the street. Like there has to be a
No,
certain level of trust and somebody backing you up, and your references and who referred you, because the pool of candidates is going to be really from the people that know the people, not from like these applications that you're going to fill. So it shows us the power of sponsorship, but also your ability to maintain the relationship for so long. So what would be your advice? Because I think this is where people just don't make time or don't prioritize. And whenever you talk about networking, everyone's just like closes up and like, no, I'm not going to send that message. And it's like, I mean, then what are you gonna do? Then just stop working and go home and like don't do any of it, right? Like if you can't even maintain relationships, which is the key to this world anyways, and it's gonna be more important now with the AI revolution and everything, it's gonna be even more important that a person tells us that you should hire this person over a machine telling them. What would be your advice to women who are like struggling with like motherhood and home and all me that I should maintain relationships? Like, where do I find the time? How should I do it?
I mean, I'm a big believer in I schedule stuff in my calendar. It doesn't have to be big actions, right? Like this person was my sponsor. I like what? I had lunch with him 3 times a year. This was
Yeah.
not breaking my schedule. I wasn't hanging out with this person 4 days a week. So I would just be really intentional about the way you're using that time. And it's probably going to
Mhm.
be a mix of reaching out to previous mentors or managers or colleagues that it doesn't have to be everyone you've ever worked with. Like again, I believe most of us, like you probably know in your gut who are the people
Yes.
that are the good people to keep in touch with, right? Like that I
Yeah.
feel aligned with, that I might want to work with again, who are going to know people or whatever. And keep in and you might even say to yourself, okay, I'm going to reach out once every 3 months and be like, "Hey, saw this article, thought of you. Hope all is well." Hey, maybe you do that one time. There's not even an ask to have a chat. Maybe 3 months later it's like, "Hey, want to jump on a coffee chat?" Maybe you're having a virtual coffee with them once a year, twice a year. Like it doesn't have to be often, but what you want to avoid is this thing where, okay, I just got laid off. Now I'm going to reach out to all of these people and it's like that's really not ideal, right?
No.
You want them to be proactively thinking of you for opportunities. You want them to know that you value the relationship that you
Yes.
have. Um, so I would be like put a 30-minute block in your calendar every Friday and reach out to one person. And it could be you might want to do a mix, like maybe twice a month you reach out to someone you already know, and twice a month you reach out to someone you don't know.
Yes.
Or you ask someone you know to introduce you to someone else or whatever, right?
Yeah.
If you do that, guess what? You've now like created 52 connections in a year. It's not a
Yeah.
small number.
That's amazing. No, that's the thing. I think people don't want to prioritize it, and there's this idea that somehow because I'm having a chat, I'm going to get something out of it like immediately. And it's like, no, this is a you may or may not get anything out of it. Like that's how
Right.
you have to approach it. And we may like each other for like a whole year and then we never connect. Like it can happen too. Like we don't know if all of this effort is actually going to pay off. We don't know. And that's why you have to like plant all these seeds to to see which one will, right? Like
Exactly.
that's another thing too. And you have to enjoy it too, because I think that's what I like. The way I used to approach it is like, if you go to your blog, in your company blog or whatever, somebody's mentioned every day, right? Like somebody's being mentioned or celebrated or whatever. I would just take their name, I would, like you said, the article, and be like, oh my god, congratulations, and just send a like quick message, tell me more about this project or things like that. And that would lead to like very organically to us going for lunch or having a coffee chat. And then when I would have some context of like where I can help them, I would actually offer help, even though I was so uh, early in my career. I would be like, hey, if you want me to really like take these flyers and stick them on the floor, I'll do it. Like, I'll do whatever it takes for
Yeah.
your stuff to like get out there. And then just do that and create that favor bank and give so much then that people feel like they owe you at this point, because you've done so much for them, and not because you wanted something in return. Because a lot of those relationships never panned out. Like nothing happened, nobody sponsored me, it's fine. um, but I think like there has to be the intent, and there has to be like prioritization, that this is a very important tool in my career. And if I don't have this in my toolkit, then I will plateau after mid-level management. I mean, most women won't even make it to mid-level management. Like they'll be stuck in like senior roles, and they sometimes they're stuck there for 10 years. They can never get out of it because again, they double down on working harder. And I'm like, no, like you got to do the other stuff that really counts.
Really.
Yeah. And so tell us about, like, you went from director to VP, you were stuck there for a while, and now you told us the story of like getting that VP role. what would be your advice to women who are also stuck at director level roles or even at senior management roles, who are trying to break into that executive suite and into those bigger titles? Do you think they should continue to like look within the company, or should they like diversify and look outside,
Mm.
or should they prioritize networking for another year before they find that next role? Like, what should be the strategy that someone who's stuck for a while should take to, finally get to that VP role?
I think it's important to understand why you're stuck. For me, it took me a while to really understand this. And I would say I didn't fully understand it until I left and I made some big changes and saw the result. For me, it was what I now call the perception problems. When I teach this to people, I talk about the perception problem and I talk about, you know, you knowing you're ready for that next step, but your leadership's not seeing it. Your boss is not seeing it. And that has to do with a whole lot of different things. It's the way you communicate, it's the way you share ideas. Are you presenting metrics or presenting insights and all of this stuff? And and so for me, like I did recognize at a certain point, it's never going to happen for me here because I could tell there, my gut told me, and I could tell by the way I was interacting with my manager that he was not going to promote me because there's some other stuff. He had known me from earlier in my career. And I think because I had been there for a long time operating at a certain level, I realized like I probably wasn't going to be able to change that perception. So you have to get really honest with yourself about what's
Mm,
going on. My thinking is if you love the company you're at, and maybe you've only been there for like a couple of years, or maybe you're only been in your current job for a couple of years, or whatever the thing is, and you can tell that your boss is actually open enough that you could change their perception, you can do it where you are, right? You don't have to necessarily leave the company. But if you know in your heart, in your gut, your soul, whatever, that you're like, these people are never going to see me as a blank, right? They're never going to see me as a director. They're never going to see me as a VP. That's where I suggest if this is important to you, then you might want to look externally.
yeah.
And you can move externally and do a step up, right? This is totally
Yes.
possible. And so you just got to think for you, like what's going to be the better move?
Hmm.
Networking is always a good idea, no matter what. Like whether you're going to try to get promoted internally, externally, whatever, it's always a good idea. So I say always prioritize networking. But
Yeah.
what I would be doing, so what I do, as you know, is I run a group program for women who want to make that leap, who want to go from senior manager, director to that next level. And I say I help you get VP ready.
Yes.
And to me, really starting to understand what those skills are
Mm,
is the best thing you can possibly do. Because like what I say to the women that I talk to, I'm like, once you're ready, you get to choose. Right now you're VP material. You get to pick. You want to stay here? You want to go somewhere else? Like you have options because now people are perceiving you as somebody who is ready to be at that next level.
yeah.
And that is so much of the battle, whether you're looking for an internal role or external. What you want is for people to look at you and say, yes, I trust that this person is going to perform at this senior level.
Yeah, and that includes like thinking at that level, showing up at that level, talking like how they would talk, what they prioritize, what matters to them. It's just a transformation. It's an elevation of your whole personality at work, right? Like you can no longer just do this work really well and expect that this will pay you the dividends, but
Oh, totally.
basically,
Yeah.
basically reducing your effort on the work and focusing on results and focusing on what matters to that next level of leadership. Yeah.
I would say like working hard with your head down is the worst strategy. That's the worst strategy. And I know that often we feel like that's like the thing we should do. I'm just going to put my head down, work really hard. The results are going to speak for themselves. It's like the results are not going to speak for themselves. You need to speak for the results. Just
Absolutely.
carving out some time. And like what I tell the women I work with is the time that you carve out to work on your own career development is as important as any other internal meeting you have. Do it in the middle of the day. Spend time in deep work thinking about what are the things that matter. How am I positioning myself? How am I sharing this new idea? Like all of that stuff, because that is the thing that is going to get you to the next level. And if you're spending all of your time either in meetings or heads down working, you're not spending any time on what is my communication strategy? How does this person perceive me? Am I thinking about the right things? Like all of that stuff, right? It takes
Yeah.
thinking time. And often we feel guilty spending time
Yes.
thinking and not doing. But as you move more and more into leadership, you need to spend more time thinking. Like now your brain and your ideas are the thing that matters the most. Like you don't have to be a machine in terms of your output, but you
No.
do need to be thinking about the right things and making the right decisions. So
Yes.
starting to demonstrate that
Hmm.
will start to change that perception so that people, can see that you're thinking about the right things and they know that you might be ready for that next level.
Yeah, and definitely networking is a part of that too, because you have to have buy-in, right? Like at that level, you can't just come up with good ideas. Somebody needs to like buy the idea, and that starts from grassroots level all the way to like people who are above you. Everyone has to buy into your strategy and your vision and what you're trying to do. Um, and one thing you said again and again in the interview is like the gut feeling, and I want to like call that out because women have very strong gut feeling, right? Like motherly instinct, the safety. Like if somebody's watching us, we know they're watching us. Like it's so
Mhm.
innate to our own safety, and I think we've sort of stopped listening to it because we think that there's some external answer to everything, and I feel like women should start sharpening that more, listening to it more. Jim Collins says in Beyond Entrepreneurship that a leader's gut feeling is the most important tool. Like most of the big leaders have made choices, like Steve Jobs and all these big entrepreneurs have made these choices because it was in their gut, and they could really follow through because they're like, I don't have a lot of logic to support this right now, but it's true, you know? Um, and I think very few people talk about that. So thanks for like shedding light on it and reminding everyone that you have a gut feeling and you need to just sharpen it, and you need to like not always look for a logical answer to things and let the gut guide you. Um, and that would feel very natural, feel very like authentic, rather than you just listening to a bunch of people who are trying to guide you versus not listening to yourself, and that's what self-confidence is, right? It's self-trust, and that all starts with like you trusting that this is a good move, let's go for it, even though it'll be hard, I don't know how to figure it out. But yeah, sharpening that gut is a leadership skill, I think.
Mhm. Well,
Yeah.
for sure, for sure. And when it comes to especially your own career pathing, decisions should come from within you. I've
Yes.
had lots of people ask me like, "What should my career path be? Can you help me figure it out?" And I'm like, "You do not want me figuring out your career path because I don't have to live
Yeah.
it. So what's right for me might not be right for you. You have to decide, what are the things that energize me? What do I love doing? What would my dream job be? Like all that stuff, like that's all in you. It's not in me. So to your
Yeah.
point, really tapping into our own inner wisdom. And I think that over years, sometimes we're almost taught not to listen to our
Yeah.
gut, but there's so much wisdom in there, especially when it comes to your own choices, like life choices, career choices. So tapping back into that, I think is really important.
I love it. Awesome, Katie. So tell us how our audience members can join your program and like the things that you do. How can someone work with you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I post content on LinkedIn every day. If you're looking for more of the stuff I say, you'll definitely find it there. I also am doing some free master classes. So if
Mhm.
this in January, so those are going to be for anybody who is trying to get to that next level.
Yeah.
So specifically, the masterclass is called Blueprint to VP: Three Success Factors, and I'm going to break down what are the things you need to be thinking about. I'm going to help you identify the thing that you should focus on most, and then also give you some really tangible next steps that you can implement like tomorrow. So that would be like one of the best things that I would say. Come to that because that's going to give you a really good idea of like where you are now, what you need to work on, and it's a free masterclass. So hey, why not? I'm all about free
Yeah.
knowledge. So yeah, those would be the best ways to get more of me.
I love it. Awesome. Before I let you go, I have one question I ask all my guests, and it actually ties back to your comment on like follow up. So, whenever I meet with mentors or anyone, sponsor network, anyone, I'm like, what's your favorite book or what are you reading right now? So, and if they tell me, then usually either I'm sending them a photo of it because I bought it, or I am, next time I see them, I gift it to them and I'm like, give it forward. Like, I just love books. So, tell us, Katie, what's your favorite book?
Oh my gosh, that's such a hard question.
I kept it for the last.
I know, I know. What is my favorite book? I'd have to look at my bookshelf and see. I mean, there's just like so many I love. One book, if you have not read it, every woman should read is Invisible Women.
Hmm.
Have you heard of it?
I've
It
heard the name. I haven't read it, but I definitely will read it and let
yeah,
you know.
it's, hang on. It is so eye-opening in terms of it's Carolyn Criado Perez who
Okay.
writes it, and it's all about how all of the data and like basically exposing data bias
Hmm.
in the world and how that impacts women. That is an amazing book that I think everyone should read. What I'm reading right now is Take Back Your Power by Deb Liu, because after I had that really great conversation with her, I was like, I got to go read your book. So that's what I'm reading right now. I
Oh,
always have like a lot of books on the go. I think I'm reading like
yes,
4 books right now. So, but
same here.
that is my main one. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
I
both great
love
books.
I love it. Me too. I'm reading like five at a time, and my husband laughs at my nightstand and he's like, "This is nowhere productive. Like, how are you getting through this?" I'm like, "It just depends if I'm in the mood for murder mystery or if I want to get some sales training or if I want to
Yeah,
read the Bhagavad Gita. Like, it's up to me." And I love having all these books all the time. I love it.
yeah.
So excellent, Katie. Thank you so much for your valuable time and so much wisdom. Nobody talks about the level of leadership skills it takes and the work it takes to get to the levels that most of us ambitious women want to get, and you are taking the time out of your life to do this work. You're actually dedicating everything to it, and it means so much to women around the world, and it meant so much to me to have this chat with you as well. I learned so much and I can't wait to see what you do next.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Hey, I'm happy to spread the word because my whole mission is to get as many women as I can to senior leadership, right? The more women we get into senior leadership, the more change we're going to create, which is, part of my bigger mission to close the gender gap.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I just want to get the word out to as many people as possible.
Yeah, and I remember reading the McKinsey report from what it was 2022. I don't think it was the last year one, but it said for every woman that gets promoted to a director level, two women directors leave,
Yeah.
and that's scary, right?
That's
Like
scary.
we
Yeah.
do
That
all this
along so you have the promotion gap that we see that starts at the first level to promotion to
manager.
manager, and that is widening as we go up, and then we have women who are at the top leaving because of burnout and microaggressions and all the things that are happening, and so, yeah, there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work to do. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think air gets thinner as you go up the mountain, right? So women need more support, more help, more oxygen. So
Yeah.
anyone who's stuck at those levels or finding it hard to breathe, just make sure you contact Katie and she'll help you out. So I love it. Thank you so much for your time, Katie. It was so great talking to you. And thanks everyone who was listening live. And I can't wait to